The highland night was shut tight like a coffin lid. On the rock slope, a tin cup swayed, its rim still bearing the mark of lips. I had seen blood before, but never salvation in small things. A loop of barbed wire, a wool blanket returned, a locked desk drawer, a fire holding its breath. Walk the slope to the end with Jace, and you'll know who hung that cup, and why silence was the only confession. The sky was just paling. Wind moved over the stone ridge like a cold hand stroking the earth against the grain. A dented tin cup swung from a brittle branch, its strap an old strip of leather cracked like fish scales. The water inside was frozen, the ice clouded, speckled with flecks of ash. On the rim, half an imprint of lips, deep, small, not made by a man who weighed down a coin. On the ground, a smear of gray ash trailed out, as if someone had reached into a pocket of ash and, without thinking, touched the snow. I stayed still, did not go closer. Smell of rusted iron, of cold smoke, of damp animal fur. Below the slope, cattle called in scattered notes, their neck bells breaking the sound into pieces. No clear boot prints, only wind scratches on the snow's skin, and a thin line like the drag of a stick. By the cliff's edge, a few strands of brown hair caught in the stone's cracks, dry and brittle. Down the slope, the ground hardened under my boots. Jace Coulter's barn showed behind a row of dry red willows. The tin roof dulled, a corner flaked to bare metal. Morning sun, striking sharp. He was pouring feed into a trough, shoulders broad under an old brown coat. I told it short. He looked up without blinking, then nodded. Didn't ask where or since when. He shook the feed dust from his hands, cinched the sack's neck. In the kitchen, the wood table bore deep knife gouges, the grain dark with oil. Beside the cast-iron stove was a rusted nail used for drying rags. The black coffee pot had boiled long enough to film over. He poured half a cup, set it in front of me, the other hand lifting the lid of the cornmeal chest. The dry grain smell mixed with the iron scent of the tin cup, as if it still lingered. No one spoke of the sheriff. I looked out the door, saw the barn chain slack. He looked, too. Didn't speak. By noon, he tied the cornmeal sack with hemp twine, 2 wraps, a miner's knot. We led the horses up the slope. The sun was weak. The wind kept its line. At the rock where the cup hung, he set the sack down, propped a small stone under it so it wouldn't wet through. His back bent slightly, his hand resting on the sack as if it were the back shifted. Jace touched the leather strap lightly, didn't take the cup down. He walked away first. I followed, the horses breathing smoke behind my neck. 2 days without snow. At night, the yard heard light steps, the kind from bare feet or soft boots. The dog didn't bark, only sniffed, then lay back down. In the morning, around the pump, water glittered in a ring before freezing into spikes. Ash dust still appeared at the threshold, thin as flour. On the 3rd day, we went back to the rock. The cornmeal sack was empty. No tears, no cuts. The knot was untied clean, the rope coiled into a ring set on the flat stone. On the sack, a faint handprint, fingertips dusted with ash, as pale as a shimmer on water. No words, no boot prints, only wind, and the short calls of a red-throated bird. Instead of words, Jace lifted the hemp rope, felt it with his fingertips, rough but evenly braided, still smelled of smoke. He tied it back around the empty sack, tucked it under his arm, told me to push the small prop stone back in place. We took another path down, skirting low grass so as not to double tracks. At home, he washed his hands, dried them on a cloth marked with old oil. Didn't touch his own cup, only poured for me. The kitchen knife lay skewed from the board, blade turned outward as if dropped in haste. He brought a chair closer to the kitchen door, stared at the rusted nail, longer than usual, then hung the hemp loop there. It swayed slightly, rasping the nail with a hoarse, small sound. The kitchen held the sound a long while. That afternoon he didn't go to town. I went instead, bought salt and horse nails. The store was loud as market day. A young cowhand bragged about seeing something moving near the north pasture herd. Said it smelled like an animal, but shaped like a person. The storekeeper's wife shook her head, said it must be a drifter from the old oil fields, and they should call the sheriff. I added nothing, just counted coins. When I turned, they were still saying, "The drifter." The word clung to my coat like dust. On the way back, the air was still. Scorched grass from last season lay in black stripes. I stopped the horse at a broken fence. Barbed wire pressed down as if something had slid over. No deep tracks, tightening what was slack. That night he ate little. Bowl set off center, spoon turned down, the oil lamp turned low. The hemp loop on the nail still trembled slightly, though there was no wind, as if remembering a touch. I sat on the threshold. Beyond, the ridge darkened out. Under the black, the dirt road stretched as a long, unlit stripe. Eyes used to dark began to pick out the house wall's pattern, a dark line at knee-height, likely from boots rubbing day after day. Things that repeat turn into marks. That night I heard the slow testing of the kitchen door latch, very slow. Could have been wind, but the metal catch gave a sound too small for wind to make. I stood, touched the revolver grip in the corner, then let go. Didn't light the lamp, didn't speak, didn't follow. The sound stopped, as if whoever was outside had caught the scent of someone inside and drawn their hand back. In the morning, a single kernel of corn lay on the step, rolled out of its husk, small, yellow. It couldn't have come by itself. Jace picked it up, set it on the window ledge. We looked at it in silence, as one might watch a fly caught in a web. In the yard, the water trough had a thin film of ice. He broke it with the broom handle, shoved the shards to the edge, leaving a round ring of clear water. The horse bent to drink, the water clicking against its teeth. In the kitchen, he used pliers to drive the nail near the door another half-inch into the wall, bringing the hemp loop closer in. No reason spoken, but enough said. Not hidden, not flaunted. Hung at the height of any passer-by's eye. I ran my hand along the table's edge, felt the dry rasp of old wood. The oil lamp sat off the wall's bright patch, its glass shadow an uneven circle. Small things remind you of distance. Afternoon, the clouds sank low. I followed him to the side fence. He pulled each stretch of barbed wire up, cinched the clamps, replaced the rusted parts. His forefinger bore an old scar, pale and granular like salt scattered. At the corner by the dry creek bed, a flat stone held the imprint of a very small toe, pressed deeper than the grass marks. Not from a town child. None came up here in the cold season. Beside it lay a small bone, white, one end worn smooth. I didn't pick it up. Neither did Jace. We only stood looking for 3 breaths, then turned away. Later that night, the saloon in town overheated the stove, the smell of wood smoke mixing with engine fumes along the main street. A blade in. The coffee pot washed and drained, its last drop falling exactly into the familiar dent. The room's order was its own kind of law. A stranger's touch would give themselves away. "Sleep," he said. His voice was not tired, not cold, just even. I nodded, pulled a chair to the window, lay without closing my eyes. Wind plucked a few dust grains from the wall. The barn chain rasped again, this time from him testing it. I heard the lock click into its groove, a satisfied sound. Done. He sat on the step without lighting a lamp. Outside, the dark was thick as wet earth. By first light, frost whitened the grass. The ash smear on the threshold remained, fine as a charcoal line on paper. There was a second kernel of corn on the windowsill, beside the first. Next to them, someone had set a short piece of hemp cord, no longer than a little finger. Its braid still loose. I didn't look at Jace. He didn't look at me. Both of us looked at what no one should bother to look at. The kitchen stayed quiet. When the sun rose a little, townsfolk passed on the road below the hollow. They waved, shouted, "There's someone prowling near the cattle." Jace only lifted a hand. No promise, no denial. They moved on. He went to the barn, unlatched the chain, tested the door, added a wooden crossbar. It hadn't been used in years, dust thick. He wiped it with his shirt hem, the wood showing a honey fade. When he slid it across, it clapped like a box shutting. At noon, he stood in the kitchen doorway, his eyes catching on the loop again. Then opened a drawer, took out a box of nails, a small hammer, 2 iron latches. Without looking at me, he held out the hammer. I understood. Followed him to the barn, holding the latch while he drove nails. His hands steady, unhurried. Each hammer strike was a short sentence, no verb needed. By late day, the barn shadow reached the old burnt grass. I sat on the porch step, watching the dust road. Inside, the hemp loop stayed where it was, intact, its back resting on the wall like a stiff neck. Sometimes it trembled, not from wind, but as if the room remembered a hand, once standing there, close to the door for a long time. Night came. I took Jace's place walking the lamp around the house. My foot sank into a patch of soft earth under the kitchen window, as if someone had just stood there. No perfume, no tobacco scent, only the leftover of cold and a breath already gone. Inside, I set the lamp on the table. The flame licked the wick's edge, yellowing slow. The loop's shadow bent the wind, its ice skin thinning day by day. Only the empty cornmeal sack, the cord coiled into a ring on the nail, and the barn locked tighter than last night. Those things told it for us. No words needed, no ending. Not yet. Near midnight, wind laid bare strips of hard ground like scars across the field. I saw him at the field's edge, left hand holding the oil lamp, right shielding the flame from wind. The light was small and yellow, painting a narrow circle on the dry grass. The lamp glass ticked from cold. The kerosene smell climbed and caught in the throat. We didn't speak. On the dark slope, a dim metallic glint blinked, then went out. When the wind held for half a beat, I saw the shape I knew. The dented tin cup. This time it was upside down on a short post, the mouth covering the top like a crooked cap. Someone had set it there with both hands, careful, sure. We went to it, lowered the lamp. Grass hissed under our boots. No footprints, no drag marks. Only the grass leaned one way, flat as if pressed by a hand. Cold ground drank the sound of steps. He touched the cup's side. The metal was cold, a ring of frost forming under his fingertip. He didn't lift it, just took a short breath, pulled his hand back, wiped it on his pants. We stepped back a horse's length, stood watching it a long time. The whole field kept still. At home, the kitchen stayed dark. The twisted hemp loop on the nail was still in place. It no longer rasped the wall when wind came, as if it had grown used to where it hung. I set down the lamp, the light shaking over a few dead insects stuck to the table's surface. Jace opened the barn, checked the bar. The horse blew white breath. We listened to water drip from the tin roof into an old bucket, the beat like a poor man's clock. Toward morning, the wind turned. The sky pressed low like weight on the shoulders. The first ice pellets tapped the threshold and broke. The storm came sooner than the weather station ever said. By daylight, the yard was lightly white. The trough wore a smooth pane of ice like glass. In it was the print of a small hand. 5 shallow fingers, the little one curled, the forefingers skewed. Pressed when the ice was still soft, then locked under the hard freeze. Not a child's game, not in this cold. He stood still for a long while, looked at the hand under ice, as if it were a photograph sealed in glass. He didn't ask what I saw, just went to the wall where coats hung, pulled down the old black wool blanket. Thick, with dry grass stuck to the hem, smelling the breath out of me. My coat's sleeve rasped wet against my arm. He didn't turn. The blanket's dark shape clung to his back like a second shadow. Past the bare birch grove, he took the old trail into the cleft. I stood in the sleet until I couldn't see the top of his hat. At my feet, a short piece of hemp cord half buried in snow, head out like a stiff worm. I bent, picked it up. Hard, rough, unfinished braid. Slipped it into my inside coat pocket. My hand numbed. Back home. I lit the stove. Wet wood hissed. The smell of damp smoke crawled along the wall grain. Set the cast iron pot on, poured water. The dog lay flat, head on its paws, eyes half gone. The barn door was tight shut. I swept the floor, gathered a few stray kernels under the table into a small pile. The tin cup in the field stayed in my mind, upturned, sealed, holding ground. In the kitchen, the twisted hemp loop hung untouched, but as if the room still felt it. The wall darkened where it leaned. Yesterday noon, afternoon came in. The storm pulled back. The wind kept its same voice. I left the coffee pot on the stove for a long time, letting the steam spread evenly, bead along the lid's edge. Each drop fell to the stovetop with a small, deep thud. A frozen fly lay on the windowsill, its wings dusted with white crystals like salt. Time passed through the kitchen in small things like that. The sun broke from the clouds, dull yellow, low. By late day, his shape came from behind the willows. He walked alone, the blanket no longer on his shoulders. Frost salted his hair and brows, his hands red, cracked. He didn't speak, took off his gloves, set them on the table. The middle finger bore a thin cut, the dried blood dark. He poured water. drank slow. Then looked up at the kitchen wall where the loop hung. Looked for a long time. "All right," he said. One word, no question, no reason. I nodded, the way one nods to close a chapter. He pulled a chair close to the stove, held his hands near the fire, not too close. Nails dark with dirt, an old smoke mark along the shirt cuff. I saw the hem of his coat snagged, a pulled line of yarn running long. The rest of the blanket was not in the house. It was somewhere the cold wind touched stone. That night he ate late. A piece of cornbread, a block of beans. Bowl placed exactly 1 finger's width from the table's edge. I washed the pot, set it on the iron rack. The dog pushed the door with its nose, looked out at the yard, then turned back in. The wind begat pieces, waking with the sense that some weight had just left my chest. By morning he was already in the yard. Using the last ice along the trough's edge, he pried it with a steel spoon, stacking the pieces in a tin bucket, dumping them into the drainage for melt. His hands darkened red, the knuckles whitening from cold. I brought out a dry cloth. He didn't take it. Only blew into his palms, rubbed them together, went on. When the bucket was empty, the trough bottom lay bare, the water black with the sky's reflection. We lived a week like that, saw no one, no new rumor. Only some distant hammering from a neighbor, like tapping the earth's skin. By Saturday noon, snow had melted enough to show the dry kitchen threshold. Opening the door, I found the black wool blanket folded neat in the middle step, its outer edge straight as if measured and tapped. The blanket was dry, faintly warm. Someone had just left it. On it a small object wrapped in hide. I sat, unwrapped it. A sliver of deer bone worked into a blade. Bone white, the edge polished, one side thinned, sharp enough to sting my nail. The handle wrapped in dried sinew, tied tight, no loose end. Smelled faintly of smoke and animal fat. No blood. A thing made long by a hand practiced, unhurried. Jay stood behind me, leaning just enough to shade the bone from the sun. He touched the handle once, then drew back as if touching the spine of a wild animal. Didn't say thank you, didn't say where from. He slid a hand under the blanket, lifted it with the blade, stepped into the kitchen. I followed. He set the blanket on a chair, placed the bone knife on the table beside the old cut mark already there. Looked at the loop on the wall, still in place, unchanged. He opened the drawer of the long wooden table, the drawer groaning in its known way. Inside, a few things he kept to himself. A rubber matchbox stained with age, a spool of fishing line, a broken lighter, a torn photograph. He pushed them aside, laid the bone knife inside, crosswise. It whitened in the drawer's shadow, like a tooth showing. He shut the drawer, pushed it in flush, took the flat, round-headed key from the nail by the door, metal cold, fitted it to the lock, turned. The lock caught with a sharp, small click, like stone striking stone. I sat without asking. He stood a moment, his hand still on the drawer's face, thumb tapping the wood 3 times. Then took the blanket, draped it over the chair back, smoothing it with his flat palm. It puffed slightly along the fold. Its ears walked out. The trough outside shone with fresh water. The wind played a dry leaf into the kitchen door, then pushed it back out. On the windowsill, the 2 kernels of corn had swapped places. No one had touched them, just the wind's jolt. At noon, a rider passed on the dirt road below, shouting something about calving season. We didn't go out. On the wall, the loop's shadow shortened and tilted as the light moved. Each time the door eased shut, it trembled a strand, humming faintly. In the locked drawer, the bone knife lay still, aged a little just from having a place. Toward evening, he took the blanket out to the fence to air. The sun lit the wool, showing tiny dust threads like a child's hair. He leaned against a post, 2 fingers pinching the blanket's edge, eyes fixed. The wind lifted it in slow surges, then pressed it flat to the wire again. 3 times the same. The 4th he took it down, didn't shake it, didn't beat it, brought it in, folded it as in the morning, set it on the old chair. The kitchen was as still as after an unnamed rite. Night came. I marked time by the stove's dying embers and the metal click of the drawer lock when he tested it again. Not from worry, from a habit formed in a day. He put out the lamp. I lay down. Out there, somewhere, someone else lay too, their back to stone, holding something we had brought from our backs. Not near, not far. That sense moved through the kitchen like a draft, not strong enough to stir the loop, but enough to shift the salt rim by a grain. By morning, there might be another small thing at the threshold, might not. The drawer would still be locked, the loop still hanging, the tin cup still overturned somewhere on a post, sealing a mouth that did not want to speak. And we would pass through the kitchen again, hands on wood, on iron, on wool, knowing we were still here. That was all. No more said, no need. The day of thaw began with dripping in the trough, sheets of ice loosed from the roof edge, falling to the porch, breaking like thin glass. The dirt under the barn turned soft, dark. Smell of damp grass, rusted iron, and horse dung rising again. I woke earlier than usual, set the black coffee pot on the stove. Water boiled slow from wet wood. Jace wasn't in the bed. The blanket was thrown off, but cold, holding no trace of sleep. His boots weren't standing in the corner. The cattle stick wasn't there either. The kitchen door was shut like last night, latched from the inside. I opened it and drew a breath. Stopped. Narrow, like something light had been dragged, not a boot track. I followed it with my eyes up to the ridge, then deeper toward the stone cleft. The sky was still gray, the sun not yet clear of the clouds. I went back into the kitchen. The twisted hemp loop still hung near the door, lying still like a closed O. The drawer was locked. The key sat in the enamel bowl on the shelf. I didn't touch it, only stood with a fingertip on the table edge, feeling its familiar roughness. On the windowsill, the 2 kernels of corn were still there, shifted inward by half a fingertip, as if someone had opened the door and the wind had nudged them. Near noon, the sun slipped out of the clouds. The dirt road showed a pale violet streak. On it, I saw a dark figure walking slow, shoulder tilted, Jace. His right arm looped around the shoulders of someone much smaller, almost weightless. They followed the line of muddy water running from the fence down. On each rise, the other faltered. He adjusted the pace, kept the knees from buckling. I stepped into the yard, stopped at the porch step. They reached the gate. A woman, waisted thin, her hair clumped in matted knots, with bits of dry grass stuck in. Her outer layer a thin gray fabric, torn at the left shoulder. The tear patched with thick black thread like fishing line. Her feet were purpled, nails thick, mud packed in the cracks. The smoke smell clung to her hair like a stove sealed for years. She didn't look straight ahead, only at the strip of ground before her toes, the way someone used to. Darkness won't take the sun. Jace didn't speak. He took her around the side of the house, not up the kitchen steps, turned toward the barn. His hand slipped from her shoulder at a mud patch. He caught it back without making her jerk. At the barn door he slid the bar, opened it just enough. Warm must and horse smell rolled out. He guided her in, set her on a bound bale of dry straw. The straw crackled. I went to the kitchen, shoveled ash from the stove, lit the fire again, bedding the wet wood with a handful of dry grass. White smoke climbed the pipe, stinging the eyes. I carried that small fire in the old iron trivet to the barn. Jace took it, set it on the ground by the wall. He added a small stick, worked the bellows with short puffs. The fire changed color. The woman inched closer, her hands on her knees, fingers pressing each other. I saw a thin scar run across her thumb joint, pale as silver. No one spoke. Jace pulled an old coat from a nail and draped it over her shoulders. It still held the smell of a man's sweat and of horses. She didn't pull away, didn't thank him. She sat like a clod of earth with fire near, rim half gone, ragged, black at the base. She didn't drink, only dipped her fingertips in, one, then two. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, from weariness. I gave her a clean cloth. She took it, wiped her face, her forehead. Her skin was thickened like coarse paper smoked over a fire. When the cloth passed her nose, she paused. It might have hurt. She made no sound. Jay stood, scanning the barn for where to put more things. He stacked a few other bales closer, making a low backrest, kicked the iron bucket to the corner to clear the path, pushed the door shut halfway, left a gap for air. The fire settled, its crackle soft. She held her hands out, keeping them at a certain distance from the flame. The skin changed color slowly, from ashen to warm. The barn's damp smell eased. I stood at the barn's threshold. Sunlight broke through the plank seam in narrow bands. Dust floated in lines. Jace met her eyes for a moment, not searching, only confirming they were there. Then he stepped out. I followed. He shut the door slowly so the fire wouldn't die and the air wouldn't rush in. The wooden bar slid across, tapped once, a muffled, full sound. It stuck in the air. No reason in words, only that sound. And the person inside, and the fire. He went straight to the kitchen, washed his hands in the basin, the water running murky, dried them on a patched towel. The towel left a wet handprint on the chair back. He didn't look at the loop on the wall, didn't look at the windowsill, only counted the new cup and the old one, chose the old, poured half, drank, tilting his head just enough for the water to go down in one pour, set the cup back in its usual place, 2 fingers from the table's edge. Those things keep a man upright when the rest shifts. I understood that. Hoofbeats came from the lower road. A pickup followed. The dust, without sun on it, hung low and gray. 3 men and 1 woman stood in the yard. The woman folded her arms, a red jacket on. The tallest man wore a round badge at his belt, not the sheriff, just security from a nearby ranch. They looked at the barn door, at the mud marks, at us. "There's been someone hanging around," the tall one said. His tone wasn't a question. Jay stood square on the porch step, his hands in his pockets, shoulders loose, eyes steady. I stood just inside, my back to the doorframe, letting my shadow cover part of the kitchen. "Not here," Jace said. 3 words, no more, no less. The tall man looked over his shoulder, saw only the table, the chair, the kettle, the hemp loop on the wall. He lifted his chin toward the barn. "Horses?" Silence. But she didn't stay. They turned away. One man lingered as if to ask something aside, then didn't. The truck rolled, hooves left the yard. Silence filled back the hole they'd pulled from the ground. Jace went into the kitchen, stood in front of the drawer, touched the edge of the wood once, didn't open it. The loop on the wall quivered, a single strand, maybe from the door just closing. He looked at it a while, then walked to the other wall where he kept the rest of the loops, bunched together, each one braided tighter over time. Raised grain, color deepened. He put them all into a clean burlap sack. The sack still smelled faintly of old cornmeal. He rolled the mouth twice, threaded the cord through, tied it off. Not heavy, but awkward. Light fell fast. The yellow went out, turned gray. I put on a coat, took the old flashlight. He shook his head. No need. He chose the small oil lamp, turned the wick low. The light was a dull, sallow gold. We didn't tie the dog. It lay still, head on one leg, eyes tracking, no sound. We took the short path along the dry creek. The rocks were slick. The morning's mud track had thickened, stuck to the boots. Wind pulled back into the cleft, the smell of damp stone and old animal fur. To the left, where the flat rock had once held a footprint, it was now wet and blurred. I walked behind, listening to the burlap rasp against Jace's coat, a steady heartbeat sound. We didn't speak. At the cave mouth, the wind drove straight in. The wall stone bore black smudges, as if something burned had been pressed there and held. Where we'd once set things down, the rock still lay flatter and drier than the rest. Jace knelt on one knee, set down the sack, untied the cord, took out each loop, laying them in a row, not stacked but side by side, like many O's turned inward toward the dark. His hands moved slow, deliberate, like when he hung the first loop in the kitchen. No offering, no prayer, just return. He left no note, no food, no tin cup, no extra fire. Just stood, brushed his knees with the back of his hand. Looked once into the cave, his eyes neither narrowing nor widening. Maybe he saw a shadow, maybe not. I didn't look. I looked at his hands. They were clean of mud. On the way back he didn't turn. We took the same road. The oil lamp swayed with his step, tossing a gold dot onto the rock wall, pulling it back again. The wind was gone once we left the cleft. The yard outside opened wide, stars not yet out. The house lay dark like a black coat hung in the night. Put his ear to the boards. No voices. Only straw shifting faintly, like someone turning in a short sleep. He set his palm to the wood. No knock. Just rested it there. Pulled back. Closed it another half-inch. The wooden bar settled with a quiet ease. I sat in the kitchen, put the kettle on the coals left in the stove. The smell of damp wool from the coat by the door gave a new breath. On the windowsill, the two corn kernels lay side by side like two open eyes. A thin draft slipped in, not enough to stir the loop that remained. On the wall, the space where the bundle had been left, a patch of paint cleaner than the rest, pale, rectangular. I looked at that spot longer than at anything else. In the silence, thick as wet soil, the absence made a small sound, like hemp pulled from a nail. Night settled over the whole house. No vehicle, no voice. Only the slow, even drip into the trough. Each drop, a mark in time. Between them, the empty gaps. In those gaps, everything that had happened stayed still, as if placed exactly. The woman in the barn, the small fire under the wall, the words, "Not here," still hanging over the yard, and the hemp loops lying in the dark cave. They spoke for us. No words needed. Nothing else yet. The wind had shifted overnight. By morning, the path to the cave was drier than usual, red dust clinging to our pants like chalk. He carried the burlap ahead of me, heavy not from weight, but from the round shapes inside. I followed at a distance. The rattle of gravel under our boots slid down the slope like whispering. The cave mouth was shallow. A flat slab sat askew, like a makeshift table. He knelt, opened the sack. The twisted hemp loops showed their plain shape that takes time. Coarse strands braided evenly, joints tight, ends bound neat. He didn't stack them. Set each beside the other, all facing inward, like many closed eyes. His hands were slow, steady. I saw a split from cold on his forefinger, white as salt. He shook out the sack for dust, rolled it, tucked it under his arm. No note, nothing added. He stood, breathed once. The ridge wind pushed small dust trails along behind his boots, thin lines following him downhill. We didn't look back. Inside the cave, the shadow thickened again, the air seeming to draw in now that it held less. That noon, the kitchen was back in its order. The coffee pot on its ring, the lamp wick turned low. The barn door half open, letting the breeze pass the fire without killing it. The woman still inside, leaning into the bale Jace had set against the wall the day before. Her hands showed a faint red from the warmth, the scorched mark left by the kettle last year. No paper, no sign, just the loop. Jace came in, looked once, didn't touch, made coffee, drank half a cup. When he left the kitchen, he lifted the loop by 2 fingers, hung it on the coat hook at the back of a chair. It stayed there all day, like an unfinished question. On the second day, another loop lay in the middle of the table, larger, the braid tighter. I set my palm on it, the tips of my fingers caught, biting in. The woman was still in the barn, door ajar, the coal fire red but small. The second loop he left on the table as before, not stacked. On the third day, the fourth, each morning, another loop appeared, never late. I began lining them in a row, edges touching, all the round faces turned toward the door to the yard. Jace didn't say enough. He only pulled his chair out, careful not to let a leg touch any of them. Every night I heard a faint sound, like hemp strands rubbing wood. Maybe wind brushed it. Maybe someone passed the threshold very lightly. The dog never barked, only lifted its head, lowered it again. In the barn, the rustle of straw grew less. Whoever was inside slept more, or learned to lie still so as not to break what was being set back. One morning, opening the kitchen door, I saw my own eyes in the metal before I recognized what was missing. The tin cup was gone from the post at the yard's edge. The post stood bare in the fog, its tip showing a pale band where the cup's rim had worn it smooth. The ground beneath showed no clear print, only a thin, dry line running toward the fence, vanishing in the tall grass. I picked up the enamel bowl, set it back down. My hand couldn't find the right place, left it off-center. Jace passed by without stopping. He counted the loops on the table, stopping at 7. 7 wasn't a clean number. He stepped to the porch, looked at the post. Both hands in his pockets, thumbs pressing the seam. He didn't ask me when. Didn't ask who. Just turned back inside, boiled water as usual. That afternoon, the wind shifted. The sun pushed one patch of cloud aside, yellow sliding across the yard. On the post, the tin cup had returned. It stood upright, mouth up, empty. Its rim was clean, no old lip mark, no water stain, no white crust. Someone had washed it, not in river or rainwater, in clean water. wiped with something scentless. I set my finger on the rim. Cold. Smooth. I brought the cup into the kitchen. Jace looked up, unhurried. He took the cloth tin cup between them. Knife to the left, loop to the right, cup in the middle. All in a straight line, not touching. A silent row, like closed eyes. Then he shut the drawer, turned the key. The lock's catch was a single decisive stroke. The hook by the door was bare, leaving a bright ring on the wall where the cup had shaded the paint from fading. I looked at that emptiness longer than at the cup itself. On the table, the new loops still touched one another. I put them in a woven basket, set it high on the cupboard. Jace didn't object, but I saw him glance, barely, at the basket's spot, as if marking where a thing had been moved. After supper, he went to the barn with a basin of warm water, a cloth, and a strip of fabric for binding a wrist. No salve, no bread. The fire in the barn lifted a notch. I stood outside the wall, hearing cloth on skin, water dropping to earth. No voices, no sighs. When he came out, the wet cloth hung on the rail, dripping slow. He watched which way it fell, turned it so it dripped into a patch already wet. The habit of placing water where it wouldn't show. Night came slow. On the table, 7 loops lay still. On the windowsill, the 2 kernels had been placed the thumbnails width apart, too exact to be chance. I locked the kitchen door, the latch falling into its groove. The oil lamp went out, leaving a thin brown wisp on the glass. Around midnight, the wind shifted. I woke to something without sound, only the sense that the kitchen had grown lighter, as if someone had lifted away a thing I couldn't name. I sat up, eyes adjusting to the faint shapes of chair, table, drawer. Farther off, the barn held a moving shadow. The dog raised its head, looked that way, didn't growl, then lowered it again, breathing through its nose. Morning. The barn door was open wider than usual by a finger's width. The straw inside hadn't been scattered, only pressed in one new hollow, where someone had sat a long while and left. On the wooden peg, the black wool blanket still hung, heavy from the night's damp. Its hem lay as we had folded it days ago, but one corner bore a small fingerprint pressed in, not refolded, not left on the chair, not taken. In the kitchen, the table was bare, no 8th loop, not in the basket, not on the cupboard, not on the hook. Nothing new. Silence thickened there. I touched the edge of the table where the 7th loop had rubbed. The wood was smoother than the rest by half a yard. Outside, the air was still. A crow landed on the old post where the cup once hung, its weight knocking the wood. It looked at once, hung it back exactly. His fingers left it slower than usual, as if removing what trace they might leave so the place wouldn't hold too much of someone. We didn't go to the road. Few passed through the hollow. By noon, I was at the stove again, pouring water. The empty space where the cup had hung stayed still. The round mark on the wall lightened further in the sun. The drawer locked, the key still in the enamel bowl. I poured coffee, set the cup in Jace's usual spot. It made a faint click against the familiar dent. I sat, listened. There was nothing to hear but the house breathing, and the chance, the change's den to make fast. Toward evening, he cleared the kitchen as always, put the basket of loops into the low cupboard, pushed it far in, set the chairs so their legs didn't scrape the polished patch of floor. In the barn, He swept the straw, gathered a small pile, not perfectly round. In the middle he placed a clean cloth, the way someone leaves a blank page in the middle of a book already written through. No words said, but I understood. That space was left for another return, if it came. I turned out the lamp early. The table lay in solid dark, the old loops gone into the basket's shadow. Outside, the post stood bare, the wind moving past it. The wall creaked as it always did. But like every night, the house held. What was missing were the small things: a barefoot step on the porch, a loop set off the wood grain, the held breath of someone touching warm water. Missing, so the silence had a shape. That shape hung in the kitchen, weighted like a tin cup, now locked away, a bone knife with its place, and a blanket left unfolded. We walked past those empty places all day without touching. Only the wind knew, passing the bare hook, sliding into the closed drawer, bouncing back the smell of cold metal. The wind, and his glance pausing for an instant at the blanket's edge before his hand dropped. No one said, "Gone." No one said, "Still here." Table, chair, hook, locked drawer, basket, post, all kept the words unsaid, and kept them as they were. Not changed. Not finished. Late summer, the ground cracked under the heel. Grass burned yellow, the tips of its blades curling like tongues. That morning, the mist was thin, not enough to bead into drops. I passed kitchen door stood ajar. The fabric curtain hung still. Jace came from the barn, sweat darkening a spot on his shirt's chest. He looked at the cup once, no lift of brow, came closer, lifted it with 2 fingers, testing its weight. It was truly full. He set it back gently, didn't hang it higher, didn't add a strap, just turned the handle tight against the post. A short, final motion. In the kitchen, the enamel bowl was still on the shelf. The old key lay in it, but turned, the round head toward the wall. On the bowl's rim, a dry ring of water, as if someone had rinsed their hands, set the key in, taken it out. The drawer was locked. A new scratch marked the keyhole's rim. I didn't ask. I set 2 cups on the table, 2 fingers from the edge. Jace poured into his, drank half, tipped the rest into the clay pot with the dead mint. Not to water, but because he never poured leftovers into the sink. Small things keep the day in place. By noon, the sun had pressed flat on the post. The kernels in the cup warmed with a sweet, milky smell. A sparrow hopped to the rim, dipped its head, pulled back at once, not daring. It landed on the fence wire, bobbed as if weighing the risk, then left. Jace passed by, didn't shoo it. The dog only flicked its ears, kept lying down. On the windowsill, the 2 corn kernels we had left sot had vanished. No one mentioned it. In the evening, I hung the dishcloth on the nail by the door. The first hemp loop was still in the drawer, swallowed by shadow. The bone knife beside it, still and white as tooth. The tin cup was outside now, standing in the light, as if it had been given back its body. Maybe true, maybe not. No need to say. The next day, and the day after, the cup stayed full. No one took, no one added. Each morning the mist thickened a little more, beading the kernels in silver dots. When the sun came, the dots vanished, leaving a faint salt edge, pale and dissolving. A few kernels darkened slightly, as if touched by water, and dried again. They stayed in the cup, didn't fall. Jace walked past the mountain slope each morning. The path wore clearer under his heels. Earth darkened where steps paused. He carried nothing, no rope, no sack, no water. Hands in pockets, eyes forward. Past the post, he turned his head 2 degrees, enough to know it was there, not enough to call it looking. Then walked on. I followed part way, stopping at a flat-topped pine. From there, I saw his shoulders rise and fall evenly. On the back inside, he washed his hands. Water ran, then slowed from the low cistern. He tapped the pipe lightly. It ran steady again. Cup in the usual place, cloth on the usual nail. These repeated motions moved the day forward without words. When I had time, I passed the barn. The black wool blanket still hung on the wall, its old fold creased flat. The damp smell turned to dust smell. I stroked the hem, touched a dry brown hair caught in the wool, pulled it free, set it on the windowsill. Wind moved it half an inch, then stopped. By night, it was gone. By morning, the sill was bare, as if no one had ever stood there. One day I reached into the cup, lifted a handful of kernels to feel the weight. Cool to the touch. 1 or 2 bore the scrape of a fingernail, shallow, narrow. I poured them back exactly, shook my hands on the porch. A kernel struck the board with a click, rolled into the floor gap. I didn't tell him. He didn't ask why my palm held yellow dust. One morning the wind was sharper, dryness sandpapering the throat. Jace passed the slope earlier. The dog ran after a few steps, then quit. I stood at the porch watching the fold at the middle of his back tighten and ease with each step. At the post, he touched the cup's handle once, quick, as if checking it still hung firm. His face didn't change. His fingers came away, yellow-dusted. By mid-season, the corn in the hollow had set, each ear capped with a bundle of dry silk. The soil's tone shifted slowly, dark to pale. On those days, more townsfolk passed, by truck, by horse. They waved, threw a stray joke, a loose question about the season. No one asked about the cup, maybe because it was small, or because they all saw it and acted as if they didn't. Jace nodded, short, his face more used to sun than rain. One evening, clouds stretched long in the west. The last sunbeam cut straight into the kitchen, landing on the wall where the bundle of loops had once hung. The paler paint showed its old shape. Wind nudged the door. It groaned faintly. On the rusted nail nearby, nothing hung. I caught the smell of dry hemp from nowhere, the scent of cord once left long in the sun, now only in the wall's memory. Night was cool. The floor clicked under my steps. I went to the porch, stopped at the post. The cup was dark now, the kernels still. A mouse jumped to the rim, sniffed, then vanished. No human sound, only a thin draft crossing the fence wire, slipping away behind the kitchen corner. I stayed until I couldn't tell the post from my own shadow on the ground. Next morning, Jace went again. Carried nothing. Hands in pockets. Hat pulled low. On the slope, a cactus branch was broken, showing the heel print of someone who had passed in the night. No blood, no slip mark, just the print. He didn't stop. At the bend, he turned onto a small path, stood straight looking over the hollow for a moment, then came. Old habit. In the days that followed, everything kept the same rhythm. I began to hear a sound before I saw the kitchen door tremble, the sound of twisted hemp somewhere in the yard, one strand from the old bundle touched by wind. Though the bundle no longer hung there, the sound remained. It could have come from a small loop he'd forgotten on the roof beam. It could have come from the cup's mouth when wind passed through, making a string's note. I didn't look for it. The sound was thin, like a thread sliding through a nail's gap, heard once, then waited for again. Each time the wind shifted, it moved places, yet it was the same. The thread of sound went from the kitchen door to the barn post, then ran past the wooden stake. Strangely, it didn't vanish entirely, even when the air stood still, like a sound already inside the ear, needing no wind. At season's end, the corn ripened. Down in the hollow, people broke ears and stacked them on wagons. The dirt road darkened where the milk spilled and caught dust. Children tucked corn silk behind their ears, running, laughing. The first autumn wind cooled a beat. The tin cup still hung, still full, but the surface kernels had begun to darken, as if a few had taken the season's breath. Jace passed by, as always. Didn't take, didn't add, didn't linger. At night, I sat in the kitchen, hand on the table where the old groove lay. The smell of fresh husk drifted in with the faint reek of gasoline from the road below. In the locked drawer, 3 things lay still: the bone knife, the first loop of cord, and the empty space between them where the cup had once been when kept inside. That gap was now matched by another, the bare place on the wall where the bundle had hung. I heard the hemp sound again, thin, long, like a single taut hair with wind going through. Not sad, not glad, just steady. The moon rose, not full, half. Its white lay on the post, the cup whitened with it. A night bird beat its wings. I stood, pulled the door open another half to let the sound in. It passed me, wound around the chair, settled beneath the table, then slipped between my legs to the porch. There it waited for another wind. The whole house listened to it. The horse snorted. The dog stirred, breathing deeper. Jace set his spoon on the plate exactly as the sound fell silent. Didn't look at me. Didn't speak. Next morning I went out early. The post's top was wet with dew. The tin cup held droplets along its rim. Still full. One kernel lay on the lip, alone, as if it had just fallen from someone's hand and caught there. I didn't brush it down. Through months passing without farewell. Jace came back from the slope as the sun touched the hill's shoulder. Dust marked a faint line on his pant leg. He passed me, passed the cup, went inside, washed hands, hung the towel, locked the drawer with a soft click, though no one had opened it. Took the old cup, poured half, drank, set it down in its place, looked out the window, nodded. That was all. Outside, the twisted hemp sounded a short line, the old tone. Enough to close a day. No more, no less. And the rest, the tin cup full of grain, the mountain slope, the man walking past each morning, the house that knew how to keep still, fell into their order. Silent, but set. There, unmoved. Here, the story stops at small things. A tin cup hanging still, full of grain, a loop of hemp no longer on the wall, yet its sound still strung somewhere in the wind. A wool blanket on the wall, still unfolded. A locked drawer holding the bone knife and the first loop of cord. No one saying stay or go, only hands setting things in their place, then pulling back. Trust, if it exists, lying in the way a door is shut, just enough for the fire to breathe. Healing, if it exists, only in returning what was taken. Clean. Quiet. If one day you come across your own cup, a small habit, an old thing, an empty place on a wall, perhaps you will know where to hang it. The rest, let the wind keep. You may leave a single line. What stayed with you? The tin cup, the hemp cord, the wool blanket. Or only the thin ringing between two breaths?